Okay, let's talk about corruption. It's a word we hear all the time, isn't it? In the news, movies, you know?
Yeah, everywhere. People generally get the gist.
Right, but I think we often maybe don't stop to think about what it really costs. Not just in money, but, the wider impact.
Exactly. And that's what we're trying to do in this deep dive. We've looked at quite a bit of material to sort of unpack that cost.
Good. So the goal is to get a clearer picture, yeah, beyond just the headlines.
That's the plan, to really understand the different facets of it.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. The core idea is abuse of power for personal gain. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, essentially, it means someone who's been given some kind of authority, maybe in government, maybe in a company, wherever uses that authority, that power, not for the public good or the organization's benefit, but for their own advantage, or maybe for their friends or family.
Right. It's a betrayal of trust, fundamentally.
Precisely. It's a good way to put it. A betrayal of the trust placed in them.
And it's not always that classic image of, like, a suitcase full of cash changing hands under a table.
Oh, definitely not. I mean, yes, bribery is part of it, paying an official for a permit, say,
Yeah.
and embezzlement, stealing funds from an organization. Those are pretty clear cut.
Hmm.
But it's broader. Think about things like hiring your nephew who wasn't qualified, or a judge making a biased ruling because one party is connected,
Hmm.
or even changing regulations subtly so they benefit a specific company or group. That's corruption too.
So it can be much more hidden, more systemic sometimes.
Yes, exactly. Not always those blatant, obvious acts.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I think there's often this perception, maybe, that corruption is mainly a problem in, say, developing countries.
Yeah, that's a common misconception. And the material we reviewed really pushes back against that. It's definitely a global
It
phenomenon.
just looks different, maybe.
Exactly. The forms it takes can vary a lot. So in some places, it might be more about those everyday bribes,
Hmm.
paying extra to get your electricity connected or see a doctor. Small scale, but pervasive.
Okay.
Whereas in other countries, perhaps more developed economies, it might be more sophisticated. Things like hidden lobbying, opaque political donations, corporations finding clever tax loopholes.
Loopholes that aren't technically illegal, maybe, but still feel unfair.
Right. They exploit the system for private gain, often at the expense of public revenue or fairness. So, yeah, it exists everywhere, just manifests differently.
Got it. So understanding that whole spectrum is key, I guess, from the petty bribe to the complex financial maneuvering.
Absolutely. And hopefully this deep dive helps listeners appreciate that complexity. It affects all of us, one way or another.
It's not just some abstract problem happening far away.
No, it's about recognizing how power can be misused in so many ways and what that actually leads to.
Okay, let's dig into those consequences then. Our sources really stress the impact close to home, right, in communities.
Yes, definitely. Take education, for example. If corruption seeps in,
Mm-hmm.
well, maybe scholarships don't go to the brightest students, but to those with connections.
Hmm.
Or maybe teaching jobs aren't filled by the best candidates, but by, friends or relatives of officials.
And the impact of that isn't just unfairness to one person.
No, it's systemic. You're holding back talented people. You're reinforcing privilege. You're basically undermining the quality of education for everyone. That impacts the next generation directly.
Yeah, the long-term ripple effects must be huge.
Hmm.
And healthcare. The sources painted a pretty grim picture there.
They did. And it's stark because the stakes are so high.
Mm.
If funds meant for hospitals are embezzled, you end up with poorly equipped facilities.
Right.
Or if corrupt deals dictate which medicines are bought or how they're distributed, essential drugs might not reach patients who desperately need them.
So it's literally life and death in some cases.
It can be, yes.
Yeah.
When the system is compromised by corruption, people's health and lives are put at risk.
Right.
That really hits home, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Okay, so zooming out from those very direct human costs, what about the wider economy? How does corruption mess things up there?
Well, it's a major drag on economic health. Think about investment. Would you want to pour money into a country or a sector where you know you'll probably have to pay bribes, or where the rules are constantly changing unfairly?
Probably not. Too risky.
Exactly. So it discourages investment, both foreign and domestic. It also fuels inequality because the well-connected can grab opportunities and wealth unfairly.
And it creates this uneven playing field you mentioned earlier.
Yes, businesses trying to play by the rules operate ethically. They're often at a disadvantage compared to those willing to bend or break the rules through corruption.
So the honest players actually lose out. That seems completely backward.
It is backward, stifles competition and innovation. It's just not a healthy environment for sustainable economic growth.
And all this unfairness, these disadvantages, it must do something to people's general morale, their faith in things.
Oh, absolutely. That's another huge cost. The erosion of trust. When people constantly see that rules don't apply equally, that connections matter more than merit, that cheating seems to pay off, they lose faith.
Faith in what specifically? Government, institutions.
All of the above. Faith in government, in the courts, in the police, even in business leaders. They start to think the whole system is rigged.
And what happens when that faith disappears?
Well, you get cynicism, apathy. People might think, why bother participating? Why vote? Why follow the rules if nobody else does? It can lead to real frustration, maybe even social unrest down the line.
It sounds like a breeding ground for instability.
It can be. When people feel the system is fundamentally unjust, their commitment to upholding it weakens.
And the sources suggested this erosion of trust is actually a threat to democracy itself.
Yes, that's a critical point.
Mm.
Democracy relies on a degree of trust. Trust in elections, trust in institutions, trust that leaders are generally acting in the public interest. When corruption shatters that trust.
And it weakens the foundations.
Precisely. And worryingly, this can create an opening for authoritarian figures. They might come along promising to stamp out corruption, a popular promise,
Yeah.
even if their own methods are undemocratic.
So people might trade freedom for a perceived promise of clean government.
It's a real danger. It becomes this cycle where corruption weakens democracy, making people desperate for solutions, potentially opening the door to leaders who further undermine democratic norms. A very tricky cycle to break.
It really does sound like a self-feeding problem. Okay, so given how deep and tangled this all is, what did the sources suggest about solutions? Where do we even start to tackle something like this systemically?
Well, a huge theme was transparency, making government operations, data, contracts, budgets, making it all open to public scrutiny.
Shining a light on things, basically.
Exactly. Sunshine being the best disinfectant, as they say. Alongside that, you need a strong, independent media that can investigate and report without fear. And of course, effective legal systems to actually prosecute corruption when it's found.
So openness, accountability, and consequences.
Those are key pillars, yes. Another crucial element mentioned was whistleblower protection.
Ah, right. Making it safe for people on the inside to speak up.
Yes. Because often, people know what's going on, but they're terrified of losing their jobs. Or worse, if they report it. Strong legal protections for whistleblowers are essential to encourage reporting.
That makes total sense. It's hard to fix a problem if no one feels safe pointing it out.
Mm-hmm. And then there's the longer-term piece. Education.
Education about corruption.
More broadly, education about ethics, civic responsibility, how government and institutions should work. Instilling those values from a young age helps build a culture that is just less tolerant of corruption in the first place. It's a generational effort, but vital.
Okay, those are big systemic changes. But what about listeners? You know, the average person hearing this might feel a bit helpless, like, what can I possibly do about this massive global problem? Did the sources offer anything there?
They did, and it's an important point. While the problem is huge, individual actions really do add up. It's not about one person fixing everything, but about collective pressure and changing norms.
So what kind of actions are we talking about?
Well, things like being an informed voter, really looking into candidates and their stance on integrity, supporting independent journalism, subscribing, donating, sharing their work,
Uh-huh.
even just paying attention in your own community, questioning things that seem off, raising awareness in conversations. It sounds small, but it contributes to an environment where corruption is less likely to thrive unnoticed.
And what about refusing to participate?
Yes, that was highlighted too. Making a personal commitment not to engage in corrupt practices, even if it's inconvenient. Like refusing to pay that small bribe, even if it means a delay or some hassle.
That takes courage sometimes?
It can. But every time someone refuses, it sends a small signal. And collectively, those signals can start to shift expectations and make corruption less acceptable, less normal. It's about individuals upholding integrity.
So it's about both pushing for systemic change and making conscious individual choices.
Exactly. The two reinforce each other. Individual actions build pressure for bigger changes, and systemic reforms make it easier for individuals to act with integrity.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. In this deep dive, we've talked about corruption basically being the misuse of power for private benefit.
Right, a betrayal of trust.
And it's not just about money, it's favoritism, bias, manipulating rules. And it happens everywhere, just maybe in different forms.
From everyday bribes to complex systemic issues,
We looked at the costs, how it hurts communities like in schools and hospitals,
with potentially devastating human consequences,
how it damages the economy, discourages investment, creates unfairness,
and widens inequality.
and critically, how it erodes trust in institutions, which can weaken democracy itself.
Yeah, leading to that dangerous cycle.
But there are potential paths forward. Systemic things like transparency, whistleblower protection, education,
Crucial long-term strategies.
and also individual responsibility, voting smart, staying informed, supporting good journalism, and crucially, refusing to participate in corruption ourselves.
Building that culture of integrity from the ground up.
That's a pretty comprehensive picture.
Hopefully it gives a clearer sense of the issue, and maybe it leaves listeners with something to think about.
Like what? A final thought.
Yeah, maybe just reflect on your own experiences.
Yeah.
Have you seen systems that felt unfair? Have you ever been in a situation, even a small one, where maybe ethical lines felt a bit blurry?
Turning the lens inward a bit.
Right. Just considering our own roles. Are we even passively contributing to systems that aren't quite right? Or are we actively trying to push back, even in small ways, in our own lives or communities?
It's a good question to ponder, not necessarily about blame, but about awareness and our own agency.
Exactly. It's about staying aware, keeping the conversation going, and understanding how these big issues connect back to us.
Well, hopefully, this deep dive has helped spark some of that awareness. Understanding complex problems like corruption is always the first step, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's foundational. Thanks for joining us for this exploration.